tripping his balls off, said he was as high as a Georgia pine. And so he took acid like hours later, so that would have been until like early Friday morning, I guess. So Friday afternoon rolls around. It's about like maybe 2:00 in the afternoon, and his friend's like, "Hey, you got to pitch today." And Ellis thought it was still Thursday. He's like, "No." He's like, "I pitch tomorrow." And she shows him in the sports section of the paper. Says, "No." It says right there, Dock Ellis, starting pitcher. And he was like, "Oh shit." And one thing else I want to bring up here that I've read in 2 different articles. Apparently, the way he took the acid was he chopped it up and snorted it. Now, I'm gonna just say this. I adore hallucinogens. I've done acid for many years now. Probably going on like 25 years. I've partaken in LSD trips in various environments, and I've had always a great time. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I have never done it the way he did it. Now, this is 1970, and people are doing all sorts of like weird shit with drugs. I remember reading like the Vietnam soldiers, like they would take like the end of a cigarette and dip it in to like a thing of heroin and smoke it, and smoke the cigarette, and that's how they, consumed heroin that way. But yeah, it chopped it up. I mean, did he chop up? Was it like a paper tab? I mean, I was like even trying to like I could never really even distinguish that. I mean, I read about this story like 20 years ago in High Times, and I thought it was like the greatest baseball story, and I just thought, how come I never heard this story? And I know my dad wouldn't have told me this story because he's not a Pirates fan, and I don't think he played for the Mets. Did he play for the Mets? He played for the Yankees. I'm trying to see the team because Ellis ended it. He began and ended his career with the Pirates. But yeah, I thought so. He played in between that. He played for the Yankees, the Athletics, the Rangers, and the Mets. And then in '79, and then that same year, he went back to the Pirates. So, I never heard of this story, and I thought, wow, this is like the greatest baseball story I've ever heard in my life. Like this guy takes acid, and then he goes to pitch. So anyway, getting back to the story. He's like, oh shit, I gotta get to San Diego. So he takes a flight out of LAX. He apparently gets to San Diego around I think he got there like 4:30. I think he got there like around 4:30. I think it said, and the first pitch was 6:05. So if he had taken those 2 hits, and depending on how potent that acid was, now that I think about it, like he was probably coming off that trip, but still feeling pretty spacey and wobbly, and he took some. He also said in an account that he took some uppers. They weren't greenies. I forget what he took, but he took some kind of uppers that a fan gave him. So that like kept him going too. So yeah. So he pitches, and he's like all over the place. Apparently the guy that who tracks his pitches or whatever, like just threw up his notes in the air because he just couldn't keep track of like how erratic I guess Ellis was out there on the mound. He said the pitcher had like colored tape on his fingers so like Ellis could read the signals, but he said his vision was all sorts of still messed up from the acid. He said the ball would get big, then it get small. He would dodge the ball like if it was hit towards him because he thought it was a huge baseball that was gonna like pummel him and stuff. And let's see, he walked 8 batters, he struck out 6, and then he had a lot of good. He had a lot of his outfield and his baseman helped him out. Let's see. Here's a quote here he had about the game. It says, "I can only remember bits and pieces of the game. I was psyched. I had a feeling of euphoria. I was zeroed in on the catcher's glove, but I didn't hit the glove too much. I remember hitting a couple of batters and the bases were loaded 2 or 3 times. The ball was small sometimes, the ball was large sometimes. Sometimes I saw the catcher, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I tried to stare the hitter down and throw while I was looking at him. I chewed my gum until it turned to powder. They say I had about 3 or 4 fielding chances. I remember diving out of the way of a ball I thought was the line drive. I jumped, but the ball wasn't hit hard and it never reached me. It probably just like rolled like right towards him or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he ends up hitting pitching a no-hitter on acid. There was like another account here that I saw that I wanted to read that he's talking about. But yeah, I just remember thinking like, how come I never heard of this story? And so let's see, the story. This was in 1970. This happened. Apparently he didn't like tell a lot of people about it. Like his teammates. Like they were wondering what was going on. Like he only knows majority of his teammates. Like they only know the story like through him. And anytime they give an account, it's basically what he told them, like how things looked to him and how he was. And the first time he told this story was to the Pittsburgh Press's Bob Simizik, and he gave the entire account of what happened, and how he was tripping when he ended up pitching that no-hitter. Simizik, he actually won an award for this article, and yeah, it came out, and then over time, like the story just like picked up steam, and but like I said, it probably wasn't until that High Times article that I'm sure that a lot of people like me were like, what? It's like a whole another generation, or like learned of this story, and it's brought up, and it's whenever it's brought up, you could bring it up to certain people, and they'll be like, oh yeah, A friend of mine, he texted me this morning, "Happy Dock Ellis Day," and I was like, yeah. I saw people posting an article about this days before, and I remember just like looking at the date, being like, oh, okay, it's coming up on the 12th, so that'll be, then I realized, wow, that's gonna be the 50th anniversary of this happening, and this story has like become like baseball folklore. There's a lot of people that are like, don't buy the fact that that Ellis was tripping on acid when this happened. They figure he may have been on something because he was a partier, and he did greenies and those uppers like everybody did. Amphetamines was a huge thing in baseball locker rooms, like at least in the 70s. I'm sure before, like in like since like early mid 20th century, there was some sort of besides alcohol, there had to be some kind of other drugs going around in a locker room. But it's well known and documented that amphetamines were the drug of choice, the vice of choice in baseball locker rooms then. So, and another funny spin on it that I saw was that apparently Ellis claims that he got this acid from Timothy Leary, which, from what I had read, may not have been the case since Leary was in prison in June of 1970. But also, I mean, maybe he got it through somebody who maybe said that, it was a batch from Timothy Leary. So who knows? But, apparently he had a hell of a trip, and then when he took that second one, like hours later, he was like really flying. But, yeah, I mean, by the time, but, now that I've read like more, a couple more articles about it and like really thought about it, based on like one of the writer's accounts about it, like, like, yeah, like maybe he was kind of on the down end, he was definitely on the tail end of that acid trip, but at the same time he took some uppers and that enhanced, you know,